Good evening, members and officers of the Council and members of the press and public. I welcome you to this extraordinary Council meeting this evening. Housekeeping. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security doors to my right or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. I can confirm that the proceedings of this meeting will be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. I would also advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? Thank you. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. Any filming or recording will not be permitted for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst the meeting is in progress. Move on to the agenda items, and agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, and I apologise that these are not necessarily in alphabetical order, particularly if you have some more members. Councillor Wells.
Point of clarification, please, Mr. Chairman, about your opening remarks. Correct me if I'm wrong, you've just said that this meeting is going to be recorded and broadcast on the internet, and yet the first item that we are to consider this evening is to exclude the press and public. Could you tell me how things stand in terms of FOI requests and the press and public seeing the conversations that have gone on here tonight, if they're to be excluded from them tonight, but not to be excluded from them at some point in the future with no reference and no decision as to what the framework would be to make them accessible or not?
I'll take advice.
If Council agrees to go into confidential session, then the second part will not be recorded.
Thank you.
So at that point we would expect an officer to go to the appropriate thing and turn the switch off, and there will be nothing else to see or hear or be kept by this council, so there will be nothing for the FOIable. And while we're on that subject, if we want to get this out of the way, can we have an explanation, please, as to why the press and public need to be excluded on this occasion?
We can cover that on the agenda item 3. And I will raise that issue then. Councillor Matterface.
Councillor Campbell isn't here this evening. Sends apologies.
Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor John Dennis, Councillor Bertie Braidwood and Councillor Roy Potts. Send apologies.
I had 2 of them. I've now got Councillor Potts. I'll read out the names that I have, and I again apologise for them not being in alphabetical order. I have apologies from Councillor Curran, Dixon, Larkins, Martin, Pugh, Rogers, Wright, Parsons, Elfell-Brass, Townend, Dennis, Braidwood, Campbell and Potts. And Day. And Jeremy Fairbrass. Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on this evening's agenda items? No declarations of interest. So we move on to agenda item 3, exclusion of press and public. I move that the recommendation as set out in the report be adopted. Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Piper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it may be beneficial for members to hear both sides of the argument for this agenda item, and I would like to make the case, if you'll permit, for leaving the press and the public in attendance, but would be happy to hear the counter-argument in a few moments. The advice we've received is that according to the Local Government Act 1972, Schedule 12A, Part 1, those are the reasons being put forward that we should exclude the press and the public. Descriptions under that Part 1 of exempt information for England are, paragraph 1, information relating to an individual. Mr. Chairman, I think it's rather late to try and avoid that one. 2, information which is likely to reveal the identity of an individual. Likewise, I think we're far too late to avoid that one. And 5, which was quoted, information in respect to which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. I think it might be helpful to have some guidance on that. On page 5 of agenda item number 3, specifically paragraph 4.1 refers, I'll just find it if I may, Mr. Chairman, factors suggested by the Information Commission as being relevant to an assessment of public interest applying to the information. Disclosure would, 1, further public understanding of the issues involved. I think that's quite an important matter. And 3, promote accountability and transparency by the Council for the decisions it makes. It seems to me that honest, open and transparent local government are vital. It is important, therefore, that our reputation as an organisation is maintained or even improved whenever the opportunity presents itself. We cannot afford any further allegations of perfidy for anybody, and I did have to look that up. It means dishonesty or untrustworthiness. Nor should we, I believe, Mr. Chairman, be labelled as a council that acts in secret behind closed doors. For that reason, my personal preference would be to leave the press and the public in the room. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I take advice, but members will know from my previous role as chairman of the scrutiny panel that I am a champion of transparency, but I'll ask the monitoring officer to make the point. And then Councillor Matterface. Can we let the monitoring officer ask first? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Whilst this report is principally about the failure to follow a required administrative process, it does include personal data about an individual who is identified in the report. There are therefore GDPR and data protection issues about publishing any personal information which will be unfair to disclose or would otherwise breach the Data Protection Act 2018 and General Data Protection Regulations. In addition to the information already included in the report, through discussing and debating the item, it is possible, and indeed I would have thought likely, that further information may be made available in public relating to the financial or business affairs of the individual, or information relating to labour relations matters, again relating to that individual. Labour relations matters include terms and conditions of employment, engagement or non-engagement or termination or suspension of their duties, and these are specifically referred to in the report, also with details of offices held by individuals and those persons' contractual relationship with the Council. In the same way that we would not disclose this information in public where it relates to an employee of the Council, identical protection is afforded to office holders, including secondees. Further, the report and appendices contain confidential communication between the Council and its legal advisor, which attract the protection of legal professional privilege. It is again, I think, likely that additional confidential information may be imparted at the meeting, and therefore I think it's important to maintain that legal professional privilege. Whilst no legal action has yet been commenced in respect to this matter, such action cannot be discounted, and would therefore be contrary to the Council's interest to share or discuss that advice in public. If Council decide to proceed with the press and public present, that will require detailed thought about what should and what should not be disclosed. That will impact upon the free flow of this debate and will not help, in my view, members' consideration of the matter. I'd like to reiterate that my overriding concern is not to protect the Council, but to protect the privacy of the individual involved. I would therefore ask Council to consider this matter in the absence of the press and public. We obviously have considered the published advice on the public interest test, and it is my opinion that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing this information.
Thank you. Councillor Matterface, then Councillor Constantine.
Thank you, Chair. On page 5, public interest factors for exemption, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 and 7. Perhaps I could ask Mr Howes what happened to number 5. I mean, was this something that wasn't considered relevant, or is this something we should have been informed about?
I think our member from Democratic Services is just confirming that's a typo. It's not a deliberate omission. Councillor Constantine, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, and thank you very much for that outline of GDPR and other issues, in particular in relationship to labour and employment issues. I mean, of course, the protection of privacy and protection of the individual in such circumstances are absolutely paramount. I just wondered why this wasn't actually considered at the very beginning of this process, and why, in fact, we didn't receive this information on Pink in the first place. What has happened to consistency of advice here?
It's all about the level of detail, and I'll talk about the level of detail later on when I actually present my report. The difference between level of detail in my earlier report, I don't think did justify going into Pink. I think at that point, the public interest in disclosing that certainly outweighed the public interest in keeping that information silent. So in my view, the situation was different there. It was a much shorter report, much more basic information. This time there's more detailed information, and obviously because it contains the Council's advice as well.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have asked this question many times, but I will ask again. The name of my fellow councillor, Councillor Venables, was very clearly in every report from item 13 the first time on the 11th of October. The whole world out there was aware of the person who was named and described as disqualified, which in many people's understanding outside of this council would mean someone had done something wrong. Obviously, Councillor Venables had done absolutely nothing
Councillor
wrong.
Johnson, I think we're going over old ground again.
Yeah, and I think that you need to go over old ground.
No. I think it's been recorded. I watched all of this. It's like a repeat on television. I watched it all on the internet, and it's virtually word for word. So we need to move on. Thank you.
You muttered to one side, but I heard you, that we couldn't use Councillor Venables' name because we were now in court. Now, are we in court or not? Because if we're in court, none of us should be talking about any of this. But that's what you said.
I think you're quoting it out of context.
No, I wrote to you and asked for a response. I had no response from you.
Councillor Johnson, can you sit down and I'll explain? You had your opportunity to challenge me on the night, and quite frankly, if you'd have challenged me, that would have been a legitimate point of order, other than all of the other points that came up that weren't anything to do with point of order. So we need to move on. Thank you.
I wrote and asked you in the polite manner that I behave, and you've still not answered me several weeks later. Would you answer me tonight? Are we in court or not? If we're in court on this matter,
I've given you the answer by being silent. I've taken advice, and I am remaining silent on that point. You need to listen to the tape, watch the tape again, and put it in context. Thank you. Can we move on? We're up to a situation where I need to say, do members agree with the exclusion of the press and public?
We need to take a vote.
In that case, I'll take a vote. Can I ask if more than 50% of the members present want a recorded vote? If you'd like to put your hands up if you want a recorded vote. Those against? In that case, it's a show of hands. So All those in favour of the exclusion of press and public, if you could raise your hands now. All those against? Abstentions? In that case, welcome to the press and public. You can remain in the chamber and we'll move on to the next agenda item. And the next agenda item is agenda item 4, the Monitoring Officer's report. I call upon Mr Howes, Director of Corporate Governance.
Point of order.
Sorry, Councillor Matterford.
Thank you. I was able to read this on Pink, but I do understand that quite a number of councillors were not able to access this document on Pink. I don't know how many that would be. I would just like to know how many people have actually read the Monitoring Officer's report with the restricted written across it on Pink.
I'm not so sure that's a relevant question, but I do know that there was difficulty accessing, and the information I received were that a lot of the councillors had gone into ModGov but hadn't gone into Thanet Private on ModGov, and therefore didn't necessarily weren't able to access the report. The other point that I would make is that the report was on free attachments with an email that Monitoring Officer sent out on the 14th of November. So I'm surprised, and I'd be surprised if too many members hadn't received the report. I'm not so sure how many have read the report, but it would be interesting to find out if, when they didn't receive the report, because it's such an important item, whether they actually contacted the Democratic Service Office, who I know were on standby to explain the situation and navigate their way through so that all members had the opportunity of seeing the report. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I've asked the Monitoring Officer in the past if he will send me copies of emails, and he's not communicated with me at all. So I've not had a chance to read this report at all, because he's not communicating with me, even though I've asked for everything to be sent by Royal Mail.
I'm sorry about that.
You can't expect me to vote on stuff when you don't give me the information.
In that case, I'll expect you to abstain. Thank you. So if I can introduce Mr Howes, Director of Corporate Governance and Monitoring Officer, in order that he can introduce his report. Thank you. This is a point of order.
Well, I find it quite outrageous, actually, that a member of this chamber can say that she's had problems accessing this information, and that you quite cavalierly say that's not an issue and you expect her to abstain. I think
That's not a point of order.
No, it's not.
I'm sorry, read the Constitution. We had this discussion before. It needs to be a point of order that's covered by the Constitution.
Can you not interrupt me when I'm speaking, and I won't interrupt you when you're speaking?
No, sorry, sit down, Councillor.
It's a point of order. Do you really not think it's important that members of this chamber should actually have access to important information?
I do indeed.
And when somebody says they haven't got access to information, do you not think, as Chair, you should take that seriously?
Sorry, look, can I explain?
Can you answer my question, please? It's not a point of order.
Sit down and I'll answer your question.
Down. Thank you. Please answer.
I just thought I'd explain. If members hadn't accessed the report, then the right course of action would have been to report it to Democratic Services. The agenda was issued in accordance with the Constitution. All members had the opportunity of contacting Democratic Services if they had an issue, and I would remind members that this council went paperless in order that we do not send information out by post, and certainly we don't send out pink information on post. Now, can we move on, unless it's a legitimate point of order?
No, that's it. Just one very brief point of order.
Councillors, can you sit down and I'll read the point of order rules from the Constitution so that you're aware of what a point of order is.
You're not in breach of the Equality Act if you don't allow other people to receive information in alternative forms.
Can you sit down? I was asked to stand up and we'll move on. Right, I'll read the Constitution to you. and then you can decide whether it's a point of order or not. Constitution 16.13, point of order. A member may raise a point of order at any time. The chairman will hear them immediately. A point of order may only relate to an alleged breach of these council rules of procedure or the law. The member must indicate the rule or law and in which way she or he considers it has been broken. Now, I've been very generous in the past because I don't think any of the point of orders that have been raised in the last two meetings have in fact been point of orders. Thank you. The ruling of the chairman on this matter is final. So can we move on? Thank you. Councillor Wells.
Mr Chairman, can I invert your stricture and just say that I agree with you, that actually members would get in touch if they couldn't read the report or whatever. However, your statement went beyond that and implied that you expected or anticipated a particular vote in a particular direction. Can you tell us under which part of the Constitution you issue that stricture?
Sorry, that was badly worded, and I apologise for that, Councillor.
Right, Councillor Piper.
Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The point of order I was going to raise before your explanation, but I'll try it anyway, is Article 5, specifically 5.01, paragraphs 2, 3 and 4. For the benefit of members who might not be able to instantly recall it, paragraph 2, to preside over it's describing your role, Mr Chairman, to preside over the meetings of the Council so its business can be carried out efficiently with regard to the rights of councillors and the interests of community. I believe some members feel that, generous as you are, Mr Chairman, occasionally it feels like debate is being stifled. Paragraph 3, to ensure the council meeting is a forum for the debate of matters of concern to the local community. Again, I think some members may feel that stifling debate serves no good purpose. And 4, to promote public involvement in the council's activities. Finally, for you, Mr Chairman, may I include paragraph 5, when describing the role of the chairman, it says, you are to be the conscience of this council. On that point, Mr Chairman, you have both my empathy and my sympathy on this issue.
Thank you very much, and I'll share my sleepless nights with you occasionally.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Piper, sorry, thank you.
I need to move on.
No, don't.
I need to move on. I can't, I need to get the monitoring officer's report underway.
Right, let the monitoring officer. I doubt it.
And the rule or the constitutional rule we're not complying with?
As someone who has been here a long time and has worked on the Constitution, I'm also very well aware that we signed up to the Equalities Act of 2010, which we quote at every meeting. If you are going to advise a councillor that she has missed out and she needs to abstain tonight, that breaches our Equalities.
Yep. I think we've explained, and I have apologised.
I presume you've apologised to the councillor, but also, if there are other members in here who haven't read this, you should be adjourning the meeting so that people can read it. Now, that's the normal course of events, instead of telling people they can't vote.
No, sorry, we're moving on.
Right.
Monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will be aware that on the 15th of October, Council considered a report which requested them to undertake the administrative action of declaring a vacancy for the Margate Central ward. It became clear at that meeting that there was some confusion amongst members about that report and the administrative step that was actually required from the Council. With hindsight, it's accepted by officers that the report could have contained more detailed background information, which would have hopefully avoided confusion and assisted members in agreeing this administrative process. Following that decision by Council on the 15th of October, a meeting was held with the group leaders where it was agreed that a possible way forward was to delegate the declaration of vacancy to officers. On the 6th of November, Council considered a report which recommended that delegation, but members did not agree that delegation, and that clearly is within their rights to not agree that delegation. However, in the absence of a decision on the vacancy, it was my legal duty as monitoring officer to prepare this report for this evening. I do not propose to go through my report in any detail. I hope and expect, given that copies were provided earlier, that you'll have already read it. But I would point you out to the summary, section 11, and my recommendation that Council declare the vacancy for the ward forthwith. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if I might have been a bit premature. Were you about to propose and get it seconded
I
to
was
get the debate
indeed.
going?
I
Thank
was
you. I'm
indeed.
sorry for that.
That's right.
That gets you to a discussion.
I propose that 1, the Council consider the report by the Monitoring Officer, and 2, the Council declare a vacancy in the office of Councillor for the Margate Central Ward. Would the Vice Chairman please respond?
I second that, Chair.
Thank you. Do members wish to discuss the Monitor's report? Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suspect I'm like a great many members in this chamber this evening and feel that we need to move on to the business of doing what we are legally obliged to do with regard to the declaration. However, I have a problem with the Monitoring Officer's report. I have had emails exchanges with him and shown beyond doubt that in 5.3 on page 13, where he says the external legal advice was offered to group leaders on the 22nd, he is mistaken. It was not. I should know. I was at the meeting. We were given copies of the legal advice on the 12th of November at a CMT meeting and email traffic to him concerning that advice, as well as issues pertaining to the briefing notes that he had issued, began on the 13th and 14th of November. It is inconceivable that leaders who had been requesting the information for weeks would somehow refuse to accept it or miss the fact that it was available for scrutiny in the manner being suggested. A review of the tape from the Council meeting of the 6th of November will show that at that meeting I specifically asked for a copy of straightforward legal advice and definition. It is inconceivable I would have asked that if I was already aware of its production. Given the mistake in this report, which he has hitherto refused to rectify, it is inconceivable that I can accept this document when it is factually incorrect. Mr. Chairman, turning to the recommendation, because I believe there are a number of members in this chamber who might have a problem with the report, but be less inclined not to make the declaration, I respectfully request that the two parts of this proposal be formally separated. Section 5 of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989 says only that the monitoring officer has a duty to prepare a report to the authority. It does not say the report should be used in this way. By separating the two issues of the report and the declaration, Mr. Chairman, it would leave me and any other members who share my concerns free to reject the report by vote and still be comfortable declaring the vacancy. It means we could declare the vacancy without inferring any legitimacy to the call to note the disqualification or the requirement to make the declaration based on our acceptance of a report which is, after all, only offered for us to consider. I fear, Mr. Chairman, the all-or-nothing approach is leading us nowhere apart from, perhaps, another rejection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Piper. Chief Executive to respond.
Just firstly, I think probably it's perfectly acceptable for you to deal with those items separately if, as a council, you wish to do that. However, before we get to that point, I do feel obliged to actually I recognise, Councillor Piper, that that's your view of the meeting of the 22nd of October and that it's your view that the Monitoring Office report reflects inaccurately. However, I have to say that I was also at that meeting and I do recall very clearly that the legal advice was available at that meeting because I insisted that it was available at that meeting and that it was referenced. However, I do understand that that meeting resulted in a discussion on a range of a number of things, and therefore I genuinely believe perhaps at that meeting there was some different views about what was available and what was available. But I do think I do have to accurately state that the legal advice was available on the 22nd of October for people who were at that meeting to view.
Councillor Matterface.
I have to agree with Councillor Piper. I was at that meeting, and rest assured, if the Council's advice had been available in a copy, I would have taken a copy. It may have been mentioned in passing, but certainly I have absolutely no recollection of being offered a copy, and I feel like Councillor Piper that that's inaccurate. I'm sure Mr Howes did have the advice, and I'm sure you did yourself, Chief Executive, but I certainly was not offered a copy or told that a copy could be sent to me by email or as a paper document. Thank you.
Councillor Bayford first and then Councillor Bryn.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure that this will help in any way whatsoever, but I was at that meeting and I honestly can't remember whether it was offered or not. And what I can tell you, what I can tell you is that the tone of that meeting was very different. You know, I mean, as far as I remember that meeting, we were actually trying to find a way round this, and that was the one where we came up with the notion that the power could be delegated to the Chief Executive. So at that point, as far as I was concerned, what the meeting was trying to do was to find a way through to actually complete this administrative act. You know, in a way, we are rather dancing on the head of a pin again, I think, where this is concerned. And I would agree with Councillor Piper that what we need to do is move this on, get the declaration made, which should have been done weeks ago, because it is a fact that this council, I think, has made itself look a little bit daft to the outside world, and it's also denied the people of Margate the opportunity to be properly represented democratically. And that, I think, is a big failure.
Thank you. Councillor Bryn.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yeah, I too haven't seen copies of those, and I think that this whole situation could have been avoided had the monitoring officer done his job properly in the first place. Thank you.
Not really appropriate. I've taken advice, and Councillor Piper. I was just going to announce, you've already spoken, but is it quickly? I was just going to announce that we agree with your proposal, and I was going to make a secondary proposal to split the two items for vote. I'm quite prepared to make that proposal, so in the first instance, Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, Chairman, not for the first time. I'm a bit confused here because we're separating the consideration of the report. So, indeed, even if somebody like Councillor Piper is disagreeing with it and finding fault with it, he must have considered it. So it seems to me kind of de facto we have considered we have considered it.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
I wasn't at that meeting, but I was invited. Okay. I know. It's terrible, isn't it? Yeah. Really? No. I was going to try to be helpful to the chairman, actually, which is pretty simple and straightforward. The purpose of this meeting, and I think a lot of previous meetings, was to get a declaration of vacancy. So can I suggest, I don't know if it's in the form of amendment or whatever it may be, that if we had to take item 2 first, we wouldn't necessarily have to formally vote on item 1.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. Most helpful and welcome. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. As those of us who have actually had an opportunity to read fully the external legal advice from Council, there's a very important point here under number 14, page 18, that I need clarification from Mr Howes, please. If you can find it, anybody who's got it. It's number 14, page 18. Subject to the provisions of section 81 below, a person shall be disqualified for being an elected or being a member of a local authority if he, and it goes on to say, I don't
believe we're discussing that this evening.
We are. We can't discuss it. I'm sorry. I don't know where. We're not. Of course, we're discussing. The legal advice, external legal advice that we have paid for, is telling us that we can't declare someone disqualified if they haven't been interviewed. That's why we're in the mess we're in. I asked for this item to be withdrawn on the 11th of October.
No, sorry.
And we could have done it properly
I'm sorry.
then. If you please
Councillor,
read it. The person...
I've read it, Councillor. Can we sit down and move on to the
I'm sorry.
vote?
You can throw me out and call the police on this one if you wish. I'm telling you, he was not interviewed by anybody in this council.
We're not discussing that.
Yes,
No.
we are.
No.
Yes, we are.
No.
He is not
Sit down,
disqualified.
Councillor, so I can make a proposal which will mean, if the vote goes the way I suspect, we won't need to discuss that item.
You have disqualified my colleague by not, and you have not taken the legal advice of your own council.
No, I can't make comment on that at
Well,
all, and
that's why
you
we're
shouldn't be
here.
making comment on
Yes,
it.
I should.
No,
I
I'm sorry.
Stand up. Stand up. Stand up.
I'm pleased you sat down. Or are you sitting down, or shall I stand up? I'm sorry. Thank you. Can I propose then that the council declare a vacancy in the office of councillor for the Margate Central Ward? Would the Vice Chairman please second?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. We can now go to the vote. Can I ask Councillor Piper?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very, very much. The proposal that was put before us was to do 1 and then 2. And you were about to say you were prepared to do that before Councillor Wells helpfully intervened. It occurs to me that if we do 2 first, we won't need to do 1.
Exactly.
So, well, I really do want it to be the correct way round. Members must have the opportunity to either, because we've considered it, we've discussed it, there should be a vote about the report, and then move on to the declaration of the...
There isn't a vote on the report.
Well, there was...
It's the council considering the report. We're separating the issue. Councillor Wells, can you enlighten us?
Can I be of assistance and formalise my suggestion, which I will seek a second for, which is that I propose an amendment that we delete recommendation 1 and that we leave recommendation 2 to stand alone.
Thank you. Can I ask for a vote on Councillor Wells's proposal? All those in favour? All those against? Thank you. Abstentions? Right, that's carried. So I've made a proposal. It's been seconded by the Vice Chairman. So can I ask you to vote on item 2, the council declare a vacancy in the office of the councillor for the Margate Central Ward. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against. Any abstentions?
Any abstentions?
1, 2, 3. That is agreed.
Thank you. That's carried, and I believe that therefore finalises the items of business for this evening at 7:39. Thank you.